All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for joining me today for our wonderful discussion on workplace violence prevention for the state of California. For those of you who are able to join live, thank you so much. This may go on over an hour of a lot of information. I'm going to try to keep it less than that, but if you guys have questions, it may take a bit. So it is being recorded. It will be uploaded to my YouTube channel at South Coast Vet Manage 263. Basically look up my name, South Coast Veterinary Management Solutions, and you can find it. So it will be uploaded there later. So if you can't stay for the whole thing, you can still watch all the information. I will be giving everyone who attends live a copy of the PDF of the slides and a lot of the documents that I talk about. So I will email that to all of you that registered within the next probably 4 or 5 days. So you'll get a copy of all that too. For those of you who are watching on my YouTube channel, you can reference the information on there, but I'm sorry, I won't be able to send you the documents. So thank you guys for joining me. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Melissa Tompkins Lewis. I am located in Southern California, and I'm going to be talking about the violence prevention plans that are required from our Cal OSHA as of July 1st, 2024. Okay, so first, actually real quick, if you notice, I put on the title, Cal OSHA Workplace Violence Prevention Plan, General Industry, because this is not healthcare, and we're no longer healthcare. Veterinary is not healthcare anymore, as far as for Cal OSHA's rules. Its information is as good of 7:30 this morning because they may change things. And so if you watch this webinar in a month, there may be differences. So I'm only telling you it's as good as this morning at 7:30 when I checked the site. So my legal disclaimer, all information presented in this webinar is gathered from a variety of sources, all of which I've cited in the presentation. My intent with this webinar is to inform you of the changes and resources available to you at the best of my ability. Any opinions shared in the presentation are mine and mine alone, and not to be construed as legal advice. I'm not an attorney. If you have legal questions, please talk to an attorney. And by watching the rest of this webinar, you are agreeing to this information. So I am not responsible for any decisions that you choose to do. I'm just going to give you the information to the best of my ability. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So a little bit about me. I've been in the field for 21 years this year, for those of you who don't know me. And I've worked specialty emergency general practice, a lot of the different things. I am a certified veterinary practice manager. I'm also a professional in human resources for the state of California. We're the only state that has its own designation because our laws are very complicated. I'm also a certified compassion fatigue professional as well. I published articles on veterinary economics, First Line Magazine, Team Brief, a few others. I mean, it's kind of fun to write. I actually like to do it. I'm active speaker, presenter at different conferences, both local and national. And lastly, I'm the owner of South Coast Veterinary Management Solutions, which is my own consulting company. And I'm very happy to do that because it gives me the time to do these things like I'm doing now, talk to you about these California rules. Okay, so getting into the information. So if you have questions about things that I'm talking about, you're welcome to put them in the chat. I'll take a break in a little bit to kind of see what questions we have. This has a lot of details to this, so I'll try to answer the best of my ability. If you have a question and I can't answer it, then you can always email me and I can try to find out information for you. Or I may not have an answer because the answer may not exist. There's certain things they did not exactly put in the law. So we'll do our best. September 30th of last year, they signed this into law. It's basically SB 553. And it was signed into the California Labor Code section 6401.9. If you've ever tried to read any of those labor sections or those codes, it's really fun. It's going to be effective on July 1st, or I should say enforceable. It's really effective now, but it's enforceable on July 1. And then basically the title of this SB 553 is Occupational Safety, Workplace Violence Restraining Orders, and Workplace Violence Prevention Plan. Okay, so I have to move a little bit. So the plan includes identifying who is responsible for implementing the plan. You actually have to put that information in your plan. Involving the employees and their representatives, accepting and responding to reports of workplace violence and prohibiting employee retaliation. This is what the plan you're going to write is going to include all of these things. It's going to include communication, or how you're going to communicate with your employees regarding workplace violence matters. It's going to talk about how you're going to respond to actual and potential emergencies. It's also going to address developing and providing effective training for your employees, and then identifying and evaluating, correcting your workplace violence hazards. And then, of course, lastly, well, not lastly, but one of the last things is performing post-incident responses and investigations. So if you have an incident, what do you do next? You have to talk about that in your plan. That's kind of a general summary. So we're going to dive a lot deeper into it in just a little bit. Why is California concerned about this? So according to OSHA, they did a study, or they have the statistics that say workplace violence is the second leading cause of fatal occupational injuries in the United States. And these injuries affect nearly 2 million workers annually. I don't think that there's 2 million fatalities. I did not confirm this. I think it's just there's 2 million workers affected annually by work, or like by incidents of injury. Hopefully there's not fatalities. I really want to get a little more clarity on that stat, but it's still a lot of people to be affected. And who and how does it affect us, right? All employees, including supervisors, managers, business owners, the owner, your practice owner, whoever, relief vets, everybody coming in can be a victim of workplace violence, which entails a substantial risk of physical and emotional harm. Some of these incidents of workplace violence can be fatal. Others can result in non-fatal injuries, but they require medical treatment, missed work, lost wages, and decreased productivity. So, if you're comfortable and you would like to share any stories of things you may have experienced at your hospitals, this is obviously not part of Cal OSHA's slides, but I included this because I wanted to make sure that everybody understood this is real and can happen to us. So we definitely can have instances of workplace violence in our hospitals. So if you have something you want to share, please feel free to share in the chat. You don't have to, but you can. I've been affected by it, working emergency. One time I had a client threaten to shoot me and the doctor that was working because we would not treat his dog for free. I had another situation when I was at a hospital that there was an active shooter in the area, not necessarily specific to our hospital, but the cops were out there, they had a helicopter in the area, and we were on a lockdown. We couldn't leave the hospital because of this threat of violence. Also, that same hospital, a client got really pissed off at one of the CSRs and tried to chase her and come over the desk and chase after her, and she had to run into the back for fear from him. That's, these are real things that have happened to people that I know, or to me, or to my colleagues. One of my friends had a client get mad in her hospital and punch a hole in their exam room wall because he was so angry. Now imagine you're the employee that goes in that room and sees how angry that client is. How comfortable are you going to be? What are you going to be feeling? Many hospitals have received threats to their team members, verbally or physically. So these are things, these are real, they affect us. And these are just some examples that I've experienced or I know of. So I wanted to make sure you guys understood that this, even though this is a complicated plan to write, it's important that we have our employees, concerns, that we're there to protect them and help prevent things that we can prevent. So basically information for employers. All California employers must identify and correct workplace hazards in a timely manner and provide effective training to their employees and prevent injuries for the rest of their employment. So, as a result of their employment. And this is basically the rule you've been following for OSHA all this time, right? Anytime you have an injury, you report it, all these OSHA rules. This also includes workplace violence. So this is not new, but the new thing is having the specific plan. Otherwise, it's been required to report these things and take care of them for a long time. Okay, so what is workplace violence? Per labor code, again, I'm reading a lot of this verbatim. And by the way, I copied and pasted this information from Cal OSHA's website. I do have the links at the end of the presentation. So if you want to review them, but that's why they're so wordy, because I literally just copied and pasted it to give to everybody, because I was not going to try to make it my own. So the labor code 6401.9, called workplace violence, is defined as any act of violence or threat of violence that occurs in the place of employment. This includes, but is not limited to, the following: the threat or use of physical force against an employee that results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, physiological trauma, or stress, regardless of whether the employee sustains an injury. An incident involving using a threat of use of firearm or any dangerous weapon, including the common weapons, common objects as weapons. If you have scissors or scalpels or whatever, you could use, regardless of whether the employee was actually hurt. So I think the thing to really hear here is that they don't actually have to be physically injured to have an employee consider it workplace violence. It can be verbal. It doesn't have to be physical. They don't have to have actually done something, but they have to feel that there's a threat of that, or there has to actually be a threat that they've verbally said something to them as well. There are 4 types of workplace violence, so I'm going to talk about in just a moment. One thing I put in here that they had on the website was that they just wanted to make sure that we knew that workplace violence does not include lawful acts of self-defense or defense against others. So they wanted to throw that in there to make sure we understood. And then the type of workplace violence, type 1, 2, 3, and 4, they basically categorized it based on kind of business and then based on the person committing the act of violence. So and this is going to actually be important because when we talk later about record keeping and things, you actually have to record what type of violence it was in the incident. So you'll want to become familiar with what the different types are. So type 1 violence means it's workplace violence committed by a person who has no legitimate business at the work site. So someone who has no reason to be there. And they include a violent act by anyone who enters the workplace or approaches workers with the intent to commit a crime. So this is basically someone who just has no reason to be at your hospital. They're coming in to steal something, to burglary, to do something, to commit a crime. And they have no reason to be there other than that. So some examples they give are robberies, whether that's retail store or like where you have face-to-face with the public. We would be affected by this potential type of violence because we have clients coming in. We exchange face-to-face with the public, we exchange money with the public. So we absolutely could be affected by type 1 violence. The other examples they list don't necessarily affect us. Delivery, unless you're doing mobile services, then maybe it could. Janitors, maintenance workers, and then threats of security guards. So if you have a security guard, potentially that could be, but we already know we could be affected by type 1 because we have, clients coming in and we exchange money with them. But it could be not a client. Type 1 would not be a client. That would be a stranger coming in and does a crime, an act of violence. Okay, so type 2. Type 2 violence is basically workplace violence. The word workplace violence is going to get my tongue tied for a bit, so I do apologize if I mess it up trying to say it over and over again. Basically, that's when it's directed at an employee by a customer or client. In their information or examples, they say patient, student, inmates, or visitors. For us, it's pretty much going to be our clients coming in, which we could call customer or client. So we absolutely could be affected by type 2 violence because we have customers coming in and they could get mad at us and threaten us or do physical harm. And they list a lot. And if you look at the very end, there's all these lists. I'm only going to read the last one. So number 4, other types of service providers where it says justice system, personnel, customer service representatives. So type 2 could affect us because all of us in our hospitals are customer service representatives because we have clients coming in and we're providing customer service to them. So definitely we can be affected by type 2 violence. Type 3 violence. So that means workplace violence against an employee by a present or former employee, supervisor, or manager. And that means someone who does work there or used to work there is the one committing the act of violence. And typically the primary target of that person can be a coworker, a supervisor, domestic partner, or manager of an individual who may be seeking revenge for what they perceived as unfair treatment in the workplace. So that is going to be type 3 is when you have your disgruntled employee, either current or post, doing an act of violence on another employee that is at the business. So this would be type 3, which again, we have employees and we have people that are present and not present that no longer work there. So we 100% can be affected by type 3 violence. So far our business can have type 3 violence or type 1s, 2, and 3. Type 4 is workplace violence committed in the workplace by a person who does not work there, but has or is known to have a personal relationship with an employee. So if any of you have ever dealt with a disgruntled ex, or boyfriend, husband for one of your employees, or girlfriend or wife, I'm not going to put that on just the guys. I've had that happen. I had 2 employees who had restraining orders over the years against their significant others. So we, again, can be affected by type 4 violence, where you have someone that has a connection to the business through one of the employees, but is not an employee and is not actually a customer. So that's kind of those different categories of type 1 through 4, and we can be affected by all 4 of them. So they point out that businesses could be affected by multiple types of violence. And so if you ever have to write up a report, which I'm hoping none of us ever have to do this, I'm really hoping that this is something that we never have to write up a violence incident report, but you do have to identify what type of violence it was. So this is what you'll look at, is the type 1 through 4 and the category and the classification of that incident. Okay, so okay, are there any questions on any of the things I've talked about so far? I don't see a chat on my end, so I don't know if there's any questions that anyone has asked Jen. If you can take a quick look and tell me if there is.
No questions so far.
Perfect. Okay, so what do you do first? So the first thing you're going to look at is do an initial assessment of your risk factors. And so there's a lot of information in detail, but you really need to sit down and look at what are your risks to your business. That's the first thing you're going to do before you try to put together a plan. You need to know all the things that could affect you. You know, like you have doors, you have locks, you have windows, you have employees coming in after hours and stuff. We'll go over that in a little bit more detail in just a moment, but you really need to sit down and think about all the things that you may be affected by as your specific hospital. And every hospital is going to have very similar things, but some of us may have a difference. Some of us may be 24 hours. Some of us may be overnight only. Some of us may be during the day only. So there's a little bit of differences that we're going to see, but you have to do an initial assessment and evaluation of what your risk factors are. And that will help you start writing your plan. So I'll see if there's anything in the, no, there's nothing. I'll just have you guys read that screen, but there's nothing really specific that you don't need me to read that to you. Okay, so let's talk about what some of the risk factors are that could be. That they've listed this example, and I think the first 3 could definitely affect us. Okay, so some example risk factors that could affect you is exchange of money. Well, we do exchange money. Even if you're not using cash, you're still exchanging money with cards and things like that. And some of us are most likely still using cash, but so it's an exchange of money. You may have employees working alone. That's a risk factor, right? If you have employees going in on a weekend, take care of pets that are at the hospital, or if you have employees coming in alone in the morning, people working at night or early in the morning hours. If you have anybody working by themselves at any time, that's a risk factor, right? You also have valuable items. Now they list money and jewelry, but we have drugs in our hospitals. That may be something people want to steal. We have other products and inventory. I personally, one of my hospitals was broken into and they stole half of our Advantage supply. You know, this was a long time ago. You can tell I'm dated because I said Advantage, but at that time it was about $1,000 worth of Advantage product that they stole from us. Now that's not workplace violence. That's just robbery because we were closed, but it's still something that they could come in and try to take. And that's why they're there. And that could end up causing injury to your employees if someone's working. Now, we're not necessarily performing public safety and social welfare functions, but something for us to think about is we do have a higher risks factor in the sense that we're dealing with people's emotions. You know, we have people get upset because we have their animal, their emotions are heightened, especially if you work emergency or if you've dealt with a really, critical case or situation. Those clients are heightened, their emotions are heightened. So we have a high risk there. So you would need to put that in your evaluation. Say we have clients that can get angry outside of, the normal. If they were just going into 7-Eleven, they're not as likely to be as emotionally angry as maybe we would, because we're dealing with the death of pets or injuries and things like that. So that's another risk factor to think about. If you're working with clients, now we can't know, it says working with clients or, customers who have a history of violence. We don't necessarily know that, but that is a risk factor. We won't know if they're violent or not, but it's a possibility, right? The last one I think is really kind of important to think about because they talk about if employees have a history of assaults or, have been belligerent or intimidating or threatening. So if you're not doing background checks on your employees currently, I highly suggest that you think about doing them because you may find out things about your employees that might prevent you from wanting to hire them and having them working in your workplace. And I should say this, legally can prevent you from hiring them based on whatever it is. But I can tell you, I had a background check a while back, not on me, but on an employee, and he had 7 felony warrants for assault in a different state. So again, I'm not going to tell you to turn people away based on this because there are rules based on our background checks. You definitely want to talk to your attorney before turning someone away, but you might want to know if someone has that history. And, they can obviously turn a new leaf, and that may have been a one-time incident, but you want to know if it's not, because if you have an employee that has a repeated history of it, you need to know that now, because this is definitely a risk that could affect you in the future. So I would highly suggest you consider the background checks. And again, talk to your attorney about what to do if you get a really bad one, like I have dealt with, unfortunately. Okay, so what does this actually look like? The Workplace Violence Prevention Plan, otherwise known as WVPP. I'll try to say the abbreviation, but the P's are going to mess me up, I can tell already. Okay, so we are required to address what our workplace violence hazard are. We are required to protect our employees and comply with the regulatory requirement of establishing, implementing, and maintaining an effective written workplace violence prevention plan, WVPP. And Cal OSHA does have a model template, which I'll show you guys towards the end. It's actually a good guide. I used the model template to create the COVID protocols that they did. And it's a lot of information, but it's actually kind of helpful because it helps you put everything into writing and it gives you a good guide. So I do suggest that you take a look at it. And then per the LC 6401.9, you must include the following requirements, required elements and effective procedures for their establishment written in the WVPP, or include them in a separate section of their IIPP. So just as a side note, if you have less than 10 employees, you're not required to have a written IIPP. IIPP is the Injury, Illness, and Prevention Plan. If you have more than 10 employees, you are required to have a written IIPP. If you don't have an IIPP, I highly suggest that you do that as soon as possible, because if you have more than 10, it's required by law. If you have less than 10, you do not have to have it in writing, although I would suggest you still put it in writing, because how otherwise your employee is going to know what to do in situations. And the IIPP, the Injury and Illness Prevention Plan, is basically tells them what to do in a situation, what to do in the event of a fire, earthquake, evacuation, flood, all the things that we could have affected by it. This plan basically puts together, you know, all the things that they need to know in hospital. If you've not done one, I have used Gamma International Services. They're really good. They actually give you a whole booklet. They have templates. You can create your own. They actually have Cal OSHA for the veterinary hospital, so you can make it specific to veterinary medicine. I've used that resource many, many times. So I do recommend them if you need something for IIPP and you don't have one. The WVPP, you have to put in writing no matter how many employees you have. So that one is not a 10 or under. That is a 1 and over kind of situation. Okay, so what do you have to have in your plan? Names and titles of persons responsible for implementing the written WPP or WVPP. The procedures to obtain an active involvement of employees and authorized employee representatives in developing and implementing the plan. The methods the employer is going to use to coordinate the implementation of the plan with other employers. And that's interesting. I thought it said whatever. Procedures to ensure that all the employees, both supervisor and non-supervisory, comply with the WVPP, and ensuring that no retaliation goes against the employees who report workplace violence. The procedures to communicate and provide training to employees on workplace violence, and the procedures to identify, evaluate, and correct the workplace violence hazards. And of course, the procedures for emergency response protocols. What do they do if they have a situation? Okay, so continued part of the plan. The procedures on how to respond to actual or potential workplace violence and how to accept and respond the reports of workplace violence, including procedures to prohibit retaliation against employees for reporting workplace violence. This is a lot of words, and I apologize for that, but it's very detailed in what they want you to write. So you really have to make sure you have procedures on what to do every step of the way, okay? And then if you have a situation of workplace violence, you have to have procedures on post-incident responses and investigation. You know, how do you do those? And then you also have to have procedures to review the WVPP for effectiveness and revise the plan as needed. And now there's more details about that on the next slide. Procedures and other information required by the Division of Standards Boards as being necessary and appropriate. So whatever else they tell us we need to do. Employers can prevent and reduce the risk of workplace violence with established, effectively implemented, and maintained WVPP, along with the strong management commitment and day-to-day involvement of employees and their authorized representatives. So in a nutshell, that's what needs to be on the plan. Now, some more information. So when you do your plan, you want to make sure that you have to identify like procedures to identify and evaluate what your hazards are. And you're going to include inspections with the following frequency. So when you write your plan, you're going to say, we're writing our plan, the first setup and the date that you did it. And then you're going to identify how like frequently are you going to be assessing the plan again. So are you going to assess it every month? Are you going to assess it every quarter, twice a year, 1 year? Like, what's your plan to do that? So you're going to acknowledge that when you write your plan. You're going to say, we're going to evaluate the plan, every 6 months, whatever you decide. And you're also going to say after a violent incident occurs, because you need to reevaluate your plan. If a violent incident occurs, so you're going to identify that in the first part of setting up your plan. And then the last one is if a new hazard becomes known. So if you make a change to your plan, you're going to tell them, okay, you have to change the plan now. So again, in your timing of it, you're going to say, if we have any changes, we're going to implement the plan, or we're going to update the plan. So also, you're going to make sure you acknowledge the procedures to timely correct workplace violent hazards identified and evaluated. So when you're writing up your plan, you're going to say, if any workplace hazards are found, we will fix them in, and give a time frame. And you might not be able to give a date time frame. It might be based on what we have to order. It may be subjective, but you need to acknowledge, what are you going to do if you find out something needs to be fixed? You have to say what the procedures are. And then you have to have the procedures that allow for the plan review. So when are you going to review the plan? We kind of talked about that a little bit ago. I would say, I think personally, quarterly seems to be like the most appropriate, but you could do it monthly if you wanted to do it more frequently. Okay, a plan must be in effect at all times in all work areas specific to the hazards and corrective measures for each work area and operation. So one thing they talk about is if you have different areas that have different risks, then you can make a separate plan for those departments or those areas. Some hospitals they might have a different department that would be affected differently than others. So you need to address that in your initial risk assessment. That's what you would look at to determine whether you have different departments. So you can have multiple workplace violence plans if you needed to. If you think that one department is more at risk than another and you need to talk about treat them differently or whatever. Okay, so training information. So the plans, as I mentioned, must be in writing. The employers must provide effective training and ensure that training materials are easy to understand. So again, this convoluted OSHA stuff is a little more complicated. So when you write up your plan, you're going to write it in plain English. This is what you do in this situation. This is what you do. This is who you talk to, and you're not going to make it all convoluted, because it needs to be easier for them to follow. And you're going to provide employees with the initial training. So once you have this set up, so let's just say August of next year, or I'm sorry, August of this year, of this year, you hire a new person. You're going to go over the workplace violence prevention plan as part of their onboarding the first 2 days of hiring them. So it's just done and out there so they know what the rules are. Now, it doesn't have to be you that does this. It could be one of your other managers if you have a safety officer or something like that. So it doesn't have to be you, but you need to make sure that you're doing this as soon as possible and not waiting, because if something happens and they say, I didn't know the plan, then again, that can come back on you. So initial training right off the bat, and then you need to do it annually afterwards. And whether, if you make no changes to the plan in a year, then you only have to redo the training once a year. If you make changes though, you have to do additional training. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so what is the training required to cover? It's going to be showing the employees the plan, give them a copy, talk to them about how to participate and develop the implementation of the plan. So I highly suggest that when you sit down and evaluate your risk factors, that you make your list first, you talk to your practice owner or you talk to other managers, and you sit down and write out what you think your greatest risks are and assess your hospital. And then I would have a meeting with your team to talk to them to see, hey, these are what we've thought about so far. We're creating our, workplace violence prevention plan. What do you guys see? Or do you all see anything different that we didn't see? Because maybe there's somebody that says, you know what, every single time I take the trash out, I have to go down this dark alleyway and I've had some incidences or whatever. So I would absolutely involve them from the beginning. You do your outline first and then tell them what you have and see if they have anything to add, because you might find out something more that you would want to do and then, include them in. And then after you've sort of talked to them about that, you're in your training information after you put your plan together, you're going to make sure they understand how to report workplace violence incidences without fear of retaliation. That's a big thing that California is really concerned with, that they want to make sure that we're not retaliating against our employees for reporting workplace violence. So you want to make sure you're not doing that. That's a big thing. So you want to make sure you teach them how to report it in a safe manner. Understanding of job-specific violence hazards and preventive measures. Again, you're going to teach them what those look like. Again, every hospital is going to be a little bit different, but very similar. The purpose of violent incidents log, you need to talk to them about what that is and how they can fill it out and how they can obtain the records. Opportunities for interactive discussions. You want to make sure that you just tell them who knows about it and how they can help them understand the plan more if they have questions. And this might be you if you're the practice manager, I don't know. Whoever's going to be taking charge of the plan should be the main point of contact for training, unless you have additional people that you want to use. And then if there's any changes to the plan after everybody's been trained on it, after it's been implemented, say you create it in July or whatever, and then say something happens in December of this year that you need to change your plan, then you need to make sure that you re-talk to your team about that you give them the new information about the plan and what the changes are. And I kind of would treat it like your handbook, your hospital handbook or your employee handbook. So when you do an employee handbook, typically you put the date that it was created on the cover. And then every time it's updated, you can put like updated on whatever that date is. So if you have your training plan, then you can do the same thing. Like violence, WVPP created on June 15th, 2024, updated on December 31st, 2024, because there was another incident that changed it. So, and then that way you have your employees review the new plan, and then they sign a document that acknowledges that they reviewed the updated plan from December of 2024. So you'd have two, you're going to have them sign off on the plans, by the way, just so everybody knows you're going to train them and have them sign it. It doesn't say in here to have them sign it, but as any good paper protocol, you guys know you want to have them sign it. Okay. So what should you do of employers, or what should employers do if an employee is injured due to workplace violence? So you want to make sure they get medical treatment right away, right? You're going to treat it like any workers' comp injury that you have, or have an accident, but this time it was a different kind of accident. You're going to get them to the doctor wherever you send your employees for their injuries as soon as you possibly can. You must give them the notice of workers' compensation eligibility, because you're going to treat it like basically any other workers' comp injury as far as from that end for workers' comp. And there's some information in Division of Workers' Compensation, but it really just explains how to do that process, which hopefully most of you are familiar with. Now, the added information is you have to record specific information about the violent incident in the employer's violent incident log, and we'll go over that in just a minute. You also need to investigate and evaluate the workplace violence incident and determine if any changes are needed to reduce the workplace violence hazards in the workplace. So it's a little bit more detailed than just a regular workers' comp injury. You have to do an investigation to determine, was there something you could have done differently to prevent it? And if there is, then again, you have to go back and update your plan, because you're going to have to include whatever that change is. If you couldn't have done anything differently, then you would document that. But you have to do the investigation, and you have to document the investigation that you've done. So it is a little bit more information than a regular workers' comp injury. They got bit by a dog. Although I would suggest if you have repeated injuries of bites or scratches or something with animals, I would make sure that you've trained your team recently on those type of injuries that they're getting, because maybe there's a problem with the training. So I would kind of treat it like that. But a workplace violence incident, you have to investigate no matter what. Okay, so what should the employer do if an employee is injured? This is continued. So you're going to review your effectiveness of your plan and revise plan if necessary. You do report all serious injuries and deaths to OSHA. This has always been the case. This didn't change. You're going to complete the employer's report of occupational injury 50/20, which most of you are doing something like that or something similar to report an injury. And then you're going to record all cases on your Cal OSHA 300 form. So this is pretty much the same thing that you've been doing for workers' comp injuries all along. There's no difference on that, except for you have to review your plan and update it if necessary, and you have to do an investigation, and you have to write it down, or you have to log it. Okay, so the violent incidents log requirements. This one's a little bit, I was a little confused when they first started talking about it, and so I now I've reviewed it thoroughly and I have a better understanding of it. So you must maintain a log of all incidences of workplace violence, even if the incident didn't result in injury. And you have to omit all personal information from this log. So if they have an injury, you're still going to do your normal workers' comp 300 form. You're going to do your 301 log form that you do when you log it on there, and you're going to do your 300A form that you would put up between February and April of every year. That's separate. But the violence incident log is something that's not publicly accessible, but accessible by employees if they wanted to review it. So that's why you're not going to put the personal information on the violence incidents log. But if there's an injury and you're sending it for workers' comp, then you are going to put it on your workers' comp log, if that makes any sense. But your workers' comp logs should not be public for everybody to see other than the summary that just says how many cases were in the year. So if you're having those posted publicly, you need to make sure you take that down because they should not be public. Okay, so what goes on this log? The incident date, time, and location, the type of violence, so the violence type. So is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? Or if it was maybe multiple, you could write that, but you do have to write specifically what type of violence it was. You have to do a brief description of the incidents, and you have to do a classification of the person who committed the violence. So again, client, robber off the street, type 1, that you have to basically put that in your incident report. The circumstances at the time of the incident, where the incident occurred, your lobby, in your parking lot, in your treatment area, wherever it was. Specific incident characteristics such as physical attacks, weapon involvement, threats, sexual assault, animal incidents, and other animals. Now, animal incidents does not apply to one of our patients that bites us. This is not about that. I'm guessing this may be if they have a dog with them, I'm assuming, and that they tell the dog to attack a person, but I'm guessing here. But the animal incident does not apply to us having like a bite from an animal in the hospital because we're treating them, just to kind of sit that aside. What are the consequences of the incident, or what the consequences of the incidents were, including any involvement of law enforcement. So did you have to call the cops? Were they injured? They went to the hospital and you had to call the police and press charges. In the incident that the client punched a hole in the wall of that exam room, I don't think she called the cops, but the client did have to pay for the damages of the exam room. So if she were going to write up this incident, then she would put that in there, that the client paid for the damage. And of course, this client is fired and no longer allowed to come into their hospital. So you would acknowledge that too, if it's a client situation. You fired them and they're no longer allowed to come in. What steps were taken to protect employees from further threats or hazards? So you have to put that in your report as well. What are you going to do in the future? Well, how is that going to affect them? So you have to, if you're going to change something, you actually have to write it in your log, and then you have to update your plans. You have to write it in a couple different places, not just one place. And then you have to write who completed the log, their name, job title, and the date completed. So that is basically what you have to put in the violence incidents log. And there is an example of that at the end of the Cal OSHA's model template that they put in online. Okay, so you have records now, right? Because you have this paper trail of what you've done. So what records must the employee keep on workplace violence? So records of workplace violence, identification, evaluation, correction, minimum for 5 years. The workplace violence preventative plan and training records, minimum for 1 year. The violence incident log for a minimum of 5 years. Records of workplace violence incidents, investigations for 5 years. And then of course your Cal OSHA form 300 for 5 years. Now, when we were at a talk a couple weeks ago we went to a law firm or like an HR talk, and one of the law firms was saying that they recommended that you keep the training prevention plan or the prevention plan training for 5 years too, just to keep it consistent in case they change the time frame that you have to keep it. So that's something that they suggested that you do. Okay, who has access to the workplace violence records? Pretty much all your employees. So all records of workplace violence, identification, evaluation, and correction, as well as the training records, violent incidents logs shall be made available to employees and their authorized representatives, aka attorneys, upon request with and without cost for examination and copying within 15 years of the request. So pretty much anything, if your employee asks to see a copy of all of it, then you have to give it to them within 15 days. Now, when you do your plans, you're going to give everybody a copy of it from the beginning. And anytime you update or change it, you're going to give them another copy. So they should have access to those plans. Now, you're not going to give everybody automatically a copy of an incident log or report unless they asked. But you would, if they ask for it, you have to give it to them. And then in addition, all these records shall be available if the division asks for it. So I'm assuming if Cal OSHA is asking for it, they obviously have to get a copy of that as well. So now I actually got through this a lot faster. I thought it was going to be a lot more harder to talk about. So apparently we're good on time because I'm early. A couple plan resources. So AVMA, if you are an AVMA PLIT member, if you have AVMA PLIT, you can actually get a template. They have a template that they've created to help with the Cal OSHA, specific to the model, Cal OSHA's model of violence prevention plan. And this is specific to if you have PLIT, not just because you're an AVMA member. So you would definitely check with your representative to see if you have that coverage. I put the link on there that you can actually click on it and then talk to them and have them help you create that plan. If you have an attorney, I would also talk to them about helping you create the plan if you're unsure, or you can create it using the Cal OSHA model and then maybe have them review it to see if you missed anything. And then the Cal OSHA model template, which I'm actually going to show you guys right now. Okay, hang on. Okay, this isn't Cal OSHA, this is something else. Hang on 1 second for me. I'm gonna stop my share really quick and go in, there. Sorry, thought I had it right. Okay. Okay, so Cal OSHA's plan, if you wrote a COVID plan from here, then this will look very familiar to you. So they basically start, and it's a fillable template that you can use to change the information. So it says like, what's the model plan for, has all this information. You can use this as your guide, how to put it to use. And you're gonna review the full requirements, review all these things. You're gonna make the plan, has links that you can click on. And then here's where you would just basically fill it in. So your name of your employer, name of last review, last revision, all the definitions of things, so you don't have to describe it. Because the thing is with doing this plan, you have to say what type 1 violence, you have to define what workplace violence is. You have to define what type 2, type 3, whatever. You can't just write a plan without that information. So I highly recommend that you look at this model to do your guide if you don't have AVMA PLIT, because it's going to be a good resource. And it explains so much of the detail that you would need. And then here it kind of has like your little table of the responsibility. You can list the people, what they're responsible for. Here's your employee active involvement. So there's a lot of information on here that can be beneficial to you. And then the other one, oh, actually, no, I'll go back to this. Oh, shoot. I had too many shares going down. Okay. And this link I will put in my documents when I send it to you, but you guys can also look at it on Cal OSHA's website. Oh, I know which one. Okay, sorry, guys. I have to stop my share again. So when you get too many screens up, it's hard to see. Ah. There we go. Oh, okay. Okay, one more time. Sorry. I had them all ready to go, but I got messed up. Okay, so this is a really good fact sheet, and I got a lot of my information from here. And so this is something, they have one for employers and one for employees. So I actually recommend that you, and I'll attach it to you guys when I email you the data or the PowerPoint and stuff, but I really recommend that you review this and that you hang the employee, I don't have the employee one to show you right now, but that you hang the employee one up in your break room, that you use that as your guide, because it's got some good information for them and then for you. And basically everything I talked about is on here. So it kind of walks you through it. And I know some of you are already thinking about using ChatGPT to do this for you. And I'm going to tell you, tread lightly. And anything that you create from ChatGPT, I'm not a ChatGPT speaker or anything like that, but I've been to several talks now where they talk about the use of AI. Make sure you don't put your company's information in there, because anything you upload to ChatGPT saves it for everybody else to see. So if you use it, be very careful and make sure that you actually have legitimately the accurate things from OSHA, because if you do something wrong, they don't care if you say, well, ChatGPT said this. So I'm just kind of making sure you guys understand that. So I would use the Cal OSHA model first and see if you need help and go from there. But this has a lot of the data here. Again, like I said, this is the employer one, and then they have employee one as well that you can post on your break room wall so that they see it. Okay. Also more resources if you need them. This is the 5020 form. Hopefully you already have that for OSHA, or for, I'm sorry, for workers' comp. There's a lot of regulations. If you really wanted to read them, they're not fun. They're in lawyer language, but you're welcome to read through all these different regulations that they did for this code or whatever, at SB 53553. And then here's the OSHA publications webpage. This is where I got a lot of the information from, workplace violence prevention guide. So all these links will take you to where you need to go to look up all the rules and all the specific things and details for this. And then of course, all this other OSHA stuff that they had on there. It has all the statistics. If you want to look up all the statistics for all the workplace violence, you're welcome to. It's not that much fun. Okay, there are any questions? I got through this a lot, way faster than I thought I would. That's really good, actually. Any questions that anybody has? Okay. Carla says, who's excited to start writing? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.